Hey YouTube, Nickel and Diamond It here. I decided to put most of the details of the actual construction of this center console that I built into part 2 of this video. So I'll go over the materials that I used briefly. I used a 1/4-inch plywood, 1/8-inch basswood. I'll do some warping and kind of discuss that a little bit later in the video. I used a couple screws and some staples and tacking nails just to aid in kind of clamping the pieces together. For the most part, it was all assembled using wood glue. And a lot of people will ask about the subwoofer. I'm sure it's a 6-inch shallow mount 4 ohm sub from Rockville. It's rated for, I think, up to 300 watts with like 200 watt RMS. I hooked it up to a 150 watt RMS amplifier and actually had to turn the gain down quite a bit, but that's a story for another day. Come to this video and you're working on a console idea for another type of vehicle. You know, you may be able to fit a little bit bigger, better subwoofer, possibly like a 10-inch, but probably bigger than that won't work. You can just forget the idea of running a pair of 14-inch woofers and 400 million watts of amplifiers in a Miata, because that's just, you're barking up the wrong tree. You should buy a different car if that's what you want. The only saw that I used on this job was actually the wood saw on my Leatherman Wave tool. Really no kidding. So you really don't need crazy power tools to do this kind of a job. I used my drill. It was really the only power tool I used. I used the staple gun as well, so that was pretty beneficial for this project. As far as prep, you can cut wood using single pieces. You trace out the patterns from the cardboard templates that you make, and you can either cut them in a single large piece and then screw them all together. That may be a simple, quick way to do the prototyping. I kind of did it piece by piece and used some screws in a couple key locations, like the subwoofer support areas, which were going to take lots of load and stress. Still glued everything thoroughly, did a lot of gluing and clamping, and that doesn't make for a really interesting video, so you'll have to take what you can get. I warped some of this 1/8-inch basswood by soaking it in water and clamping it with support at both ends. Like you'll see, the tips I would have for that are you just want to soak it, clamp it until it dries, soak it again, clamp it until it dries with a little bit more support height, and then just slowly work it into the shape that you want it to be. You're going to have to just be patient with it because the wood doesn't naturally want to conform to that shape, but once it dries, it'll be much more compliant to the shape that you want it to be. Also, one of the things that I had to do as part of this project, you'll see I take a couple shots of the trunk release and fuel door release. I had to relocate those over to the driver's side near the roll bar that I recently did an install video of. So that's something you have to take into account for the Miatas anyway, if you're going to do this kind of console. I did try and do a fancy setup for making a jig to mount my hinges in the lid plate that I was making, and ended up deciding that after taking some more measurements, without leaving about a 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 an inch really gap on the one side, I wasn't going to be able to reuse the factory hardware, which I actually did end up doing for this build. I did reuse the factory hardware, and I didn't want to leave a 1/2 inch gap, so I changed the orientation of the hinges, and you'll see toward the end of the video, when I open up the lid, the back portion sort of tucks between the hinge mounting bar and the subwoofer. So it's actually a very clean mounting solution that I was able to come up with, and both the driver and the passengers are able to get into the console and use things. So that was kind of a nice feature. I also was able to reuse the factory lock, and I'll demonstrate that as well, so that you can lock your valuables in the console, which probably shouldn't lock really valuable stuff in a Miata anyway, but yes, this console is in fact large enough to hold your hairdryer and your hairbrush at the same time. I know that's really important to most. One of the things that you really want to spend time doing is making sure your cup holders are the right size for what you want to carry. I set mine up so that I had about a 3-inch depth at least inside the cup holders, and I wanted to make sure that they would clear typical Camelback water bottles, because I knew that those are about the same size as 90% of the travel mugs and any fast food cups that you're going to be handling. So that's a good rule of thumb to hold to, is if you can have about at least a 3-inch diameter and a 3-inch depth, your cup holders will work great, unless you're into drinking energy drinks in the silly little cans, in which case, yeah, that's your problem. Last and most important thing is you really want to check your fitment and install it in the car, probably before you upholster it, because it's a whole lot easier to make final adjustments before you try and do the upholstery step. So you want to run through your gear pattern and all of those sorts of things. You really want to use the console for a little bit before you commit and do the final upholstery work, because it's so much easier to change in wood than it is in upholstered format. So as always, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for part 3, where I'll cover the upholstery portion, and let me know what you think, like, dislike, etc., and leave comments if you decided that custom interior work isn't really that scary. Thanks.